We are about to take a momentous step to right a major wrong and for the good in the tragic story of the death penalty. Let me briefly touch on why this is the right move for us today. There is no better reason to end the death penalty now than innocence. We put 20 men on the death row who shouldn't have even been there. That's 20 lives ruined when one is too many. This is the second highest number of exonerations in the United States. We heard a lot recently about not having enough time about this issue, that we're rushing it through. But let me give you some other times to think about. Those 20 men on death row spent about 250 years on death row. Think about that. That's how long we've been a nation. We put executions on hold for 10 years because of problems with the system.
For the next 3 hours, he's interviewed in the back seat of that car. And as he's talked to, ladies and gentlemen, he won't talk. He won't tell us where that beautiful 11-month-old child is until Gary Fear, an FBI agent who ironically was just elected to the Missouri House of Representatives in November, convinced him that you know what happens to people in prison if they have done something like this? Do you realize you're facing the death penalty if this child dies? And then, ladies and gentlemen, and only then, will he talk about where the child is, because he knows a life in prison that goes just fine with his lifestyle. 3 hots and a cot. He can get the sex he wants, whatever. He can live large. But he tells us where the child is. I was among the investigators that night tramping through the woods and finding the nude body. He was still alive, thankfully. He's alive today. He's a young man, doesn't remember it. Dougie Bartels, his father a doctor at the Rockford School of Medicine. And the only reason we found that child alive, the only reason, is law enforcement had the ability to look that man in the eye and say, if that child dies, you're going to face the death penalty. He sang like a canary, thankfully. Don't take that tool away from law enforcement, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, there are heinous crimes, and yes, heinous crimes shock the conscience community, and yes, we want justice. But let me tell you that a heinous crime in one county may get the prosecutors asking for a 10-year sentence if the individual is convicted. The very same crime in another county may result in the request for the death penalty. The decision to have the death penalty in one case but not another, that's a random decision in the state of Illinois. Counties and crimes are all over the map. And a system of random death penalties is no way to run a criminal justice system. And there's another problem with the randomness of the death penalty, and that is people who are poor and people who are members of minority groups are a whole lot more at risk of being socked with the death penalty than people who are members of the majority and people who are affluent. And that is no way to run a criminal justice system.
Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. Today, in this room, under the watchful eye of President Abraham Lincoln, by a constitutional majority of the members elected to the Illinois General Assembly, and by my actions as governor, we have abolished the death penalty in Illinois, the land of Lincoln.
Yeah, the one most significant argument from my perspective as a prosecutor is that we try criminal cases to a standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all doubt. There's room for doubt, even after a conviction in our system. And we cannot be in a position of executing people where we have room for doubt.
The light of God is shining positively upon our state. This is a historic day. we enter into this business trying to have some impact on lives. There's no greater impact that you can have than to do something that will save a life. And all lives are worthy to be saved. We cannot put ourselves in the role of God and decide when it is time for a man or woman's life to end.
It's up to us to study the tough issues, to understand both sides of the issue, and then come down on one side or the other. I'm glad, and I feel like I came down on the right side of this issue. It's been tough, though. I feel like I've been on a roller coaster, and I hate roller coasters. And I mean a roller coaster of emotions, because I've certainly talked to lots of people who have been against this provision, and then the other folks who were for it, and then I had all my colleagues in the House.
I believe that Governor Quinn is a compassionate man. He made a decision today, a moral, righteous decision, when he realized that there are flaws in this system that almost took my life and 19 other men in Illinois. The system could not be sustained, and I think every Illinois citizen should commend Governor Quinn for signing this bill and guarantee that nobody will ever stand in a courtroom again in Illinois, an innocent man, and face a sentence of death.
Thank you, Speaker and members of the House. Illinois is in crisis, absolute financial crisis, and there is no way we can dig ourselves out of the crisis without increased revenues. We all agree we need to make cuts. We have made cuts. Over the last 2 years, we have cut $3 billion in state general fund spending, $3 billion. Just this session, we made significant changes in the state pension system going forward, changes that will save significant dollars, perhaps as many as $200 million over some next few years. We also have reformed and brought integrity to the Medicaid program, and we anticipate that there will be significant savings from the reform of the Medicaid program. But there is no way we can take we can cut our way out of the deficit we face, out of the $13 billion that is the problem that faces the state today. To make a 40% cut in current state programs means we'd have to cancel wholesale programs of state government. I don't mean just a program here and a program there. I am talking about cutting out entire agencies of state government. No responsible observer believes that we can escape our problem without some kind of revenue enhancement, and the provisions of Senate Bill 2505 would provide precisely that. The measure would increase the individual income tax from 3% to 5%, the corporate tax from 4.8 to 7, and in some of those proceeds would be used to borrow so that we can pay our bills. Today we are borrowing from our vendors. We are actually making them bear the brunt of our financial problems, and we would then keep that portion of the tax increase in place for 14 years until the bonds are all paid off.
Isn't there something wrong with that type of a burden to be placed on individuals due to the fact that we've mismanaged in this General Assembly for 8 years our responsibilities to balance our budget and make sure that we're not spending at a rate that's greater than the amount of money that we have to spend?
You know, Representative, I think the time for casting aspersions, pointing fingers, playing the blame game, that's over. That is over. This mess is a mess that is the responsibility of all of us, of Republicans, of Democrats, of several different governors, and part of the mess isn't even anybody's fault except for the fact that we are in the biggest recession, the worst recession since the Great Depression. We are in crisis, Representative, and it does no good to say, oh, gee, let's go back and do the whole thing over again, starting from 8 or 10 or 12 years ago. It's too late, Representative, too late. It's time.
Representative, I look at this chart that estimates the effect that this is going to have on people. And I haven't even started talking about the effect that this is going to have on people who bring jobs to this state. We're raising the income tax on businesses and expecting them to stay in Illinois when they don't have to. At a time when we're looking at some recovery, and I heard Director Vaught during the committee talk about the fact that we actually are beginning to see some reduction in unemployment and some new jobs come to the state. So what are we going to do to that momentum? We're going to raise the taxes on businesses.
Our state has a spending problem, and this legislation will exacerbate it. It is designed to maintain the status quo and business as usual. It is designed to increase spending. Let me repeat that. It is designed to increase spending. It does not require meaningful cuts or hard decisions to be made. It will perpetuate a system of inefficiency and unaccountability. It will hamper business growth and put Illinois at a competitive disadvantage.
The wolf is at the door, ladies and gentlemen. The wolf is at the door, and we have some very unpleasant decisions to make, and there are basically two of them that we can make today. My worry, if we do not pass this bill, are the unintended consequences of our inaction. We could trigger a cascade of public and private defaults that will rapidly spiral out of our ability to address them. If I can just bring up a couple of these. If the state is not able to make its obligations, we have $13 billion of obligations out there which we cannot satisfy. Our failure to make those obligations and the failure of businesses or social service agencies or churches or faith-based groups to borrow any further could trigger a wave of layoffs of more of our residents in every district of this state. It could cause businesses to collapse, defaults on loans to banks which have already extended credit. People could close their doors.
The clerk shall take the record. On this question, there are 60 people voting yes, 57 people voting no. This bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.
In the past year, Illinois has begun an impressive recovery, and we have taken important steps to rescue our state's finances. We must have financial stability in Illinois. We must have it. Budget stability is crucial for the success of businesses, families, and the state of Illinois. It's critical. It's a critical factor in attracting business and keeping business investment and in creating jobs. And it's how we will lead Illinois citizens to economic prosperity and maintain our role as a global economic powerhouse. We have taken the first steps to stabilize our budget, and with a comprehensive plan to restrain spending and reform state government, we're on our way. But the first part of this plan is budget restraint and finding new ways to reduce unnecessary state spending. And since taking office, I have reduced our spending every year, and no area is above review. Last year, we enacted a landmark pension reform law, the most far-reaching public pension reform law ever enacted by a state in our country's history. And over the next generation, we will save the people of Illinois $220 billion. And just last month, I signed into law historic caps on state spending.
and our commitment to taxpayers is simple. We will only use tax dollars to provide necessary state services. All unnecessary state spending will be eliminated.
8 years ago, Medicaid was a $6.5 billion program with about 1.6 million people enrolled. Today, we went from 1.6 million people to 2.8 million people, and from 6.5 billion to 10.4 billion. A massive expansion of our social safety net program, one that frankly is unsustainable. If we were at the national average on eligibility for Medicaid, we would save about $1.6 billion out of our budget. Our target out of Medicaid, and there are a number of different ways to get there, and we are open to any other solutions for how to do this. But if you took and put us at just the national average of states on eligibility for Medicaid, we would save $1.6 billion a year. That's even greater than our target. The truth of the matter is, we are not in a position to be any more generous than the national when it comes to Medicaid.
Your state of Illinois is in a lot of difficulty, a lot of difficulty. And let's try to understand it this way. You all know that early in January, the legislature raised the Illinois income tax by over 60%, a huge increase. That 60% increase in the income tax will bring into the state on an annual basis $6 billion. So the state, through that increase in the tax, increased its receipts by $6 billion. To put that into perspective in terms of the problems that we face as we go forward, $6 billion is the exact amount of money that the legislature will be required to pay over to the 5 state pension systems in the next budget.
People living longer, okay? So when we set up these systems in the 30s, people died at age 60 or 65, and when they retired, they only lived a few years, and they put in a lot of money, and by the time they died, it all kind of evened out. Now we have people living to 80, 85 years old. So if you do the math on if somebody lives 25 or 30 years into retirement, you take what they get in retirement versus what they put in, there's a huge
disparity between
the two. And in Illinois, we have what's called a COLA, cost of living increase, or cost of living adjustment, that it takes that pension and has it climb every year by 3%, and it compounds. If you do the math, if you retire, if you live for 25 years, you will literally double your pension. So if you get a pension of $50,000 in 25 years, your pension will be $100,000. Not what it's worth, but actually $100,000 because of that compounding of the interest.
Is McDonald versus Chicago, and the way the Supreme Court ruled that, and then you saw the administration, the mayor's office, scramble to try to change everything they could to make it that much harder for somebody in Chicago to receive, a handgun, to obtain a handgun. So that's what a lot of people are saying. He said, we're tired of the fight. A lot of people are saying, legislators, we're tired of the fight. We got the Supreme Court ruling in your favor, Representative Phelps. So you know what? I'm tired of messing with this. Let's go about the way we should. And like I said, that's what they're trying to hang their hat on. And I think, like I said earlier, they're hearing a lot from their constituency that they really want this.
For Memorial alone, it's $2.3 million of lost revenue. Now, we can only do a couple of things with that. We can either reduce services, which is really not our objective because we're here to provide care for injured employees. We can reduce staff, which won't help the long-term care of the employees, or we can delay providing up-to-date technology, which also takes care of the employees. So this is a significant impact, and ultimately it's going to have a detrimental impact on the quality of the care that all patients receive.
Well, remember that hospitals are, in addition to providing health care for injured workers to help restore them, hospitals are also large employers. Across the state, we employ about 250,000 people. So we care about this issue both on the business side and on the provider side. Our concern at the moment is that we're rushing at the last minute to get something done, and we think that this issue is so complex that it ought to be a thoughtful dialogue between all of the parties to make sure that, again, injured workers are properly cared for, and so that something that's fair to injured workers but not unfair to business, and we're just concerned about how fast things are moving.
Now, the reason why I'm interested in this is because of quite frankly, it's just the merits of this are overwhelming. When these other governors have criticized us for our tax increase, I disagree with them. I said, I still think that we're very competitive compared to other states. But in the area of workers' comp, we're not. So we have to take on these challenges. But the Republicans have no votes in their caucus as well. People that don't want to vote against the hospitals, which are usually the largest employer in many people's communities, or the doctors who've been allies of those individual Republican senators. So this is going to be really difficult.
We're invested heavily here, and we are going to work together to find a way we can invest more here and continue to be proud of our state as we move on. Certainly there's lots of areas to work together, and exports is a key one. We exported last year almost $13.5 billion of goods from the United States, a big piece of that right here in Illinois. If you look at our Decatur plant, our East Peoria plant, and our Aurora plant where we make big equipment, upwards of 70% of every day's production is for export. We have to have those markets. Those are good plants, efficient plants. We're investing in them. We will spend $1 billion over the last several years, and when we get done with them in the next couple years, in revamping them to make them the best plants in the world in that business. So we're happy about that. We talked a little bit about workman's comp, and we really need help on this one. And the governor is committed to do that. I'm encouraged by what I heard on that one. That's a big piece of our competitiveness issue around the state. We talked a lot about infrastructure build. Capital expense around the state as well. We have got to be competitive in Illinois, competitive in the United States to take on emerging competitors we see every day around the world.
And I'm happy to say that for 13 straight months, Illinois has reduced its unemployment. I want to continue on that. For 3 straight months, every single county in Illinois, large and small, has reduced its unemployment. For 3 straight months, first time ever in Illinois history. Our exports are up 20% from the year previous. Our goal is to double our exports in Illinois over the next 5 years.
You can see back from 1941 during World War II, this is the debt held by public as a percent of the gross domestic product, GDP. And you can see where we are here in 2010. And this is based on the President's proposed budget. So right now we just have the President's proposed budget that he released. These are numbers that are coming from the Congressional Budget Office. And this is where we are in 2010 as a percent of GDP. Based on the President's proposed budget, as it's introduced, this is what would happen to our debt as a percent of GDP. So you can see what my concern is with the President's budget.
As you can see, we mortgaged our country in World War II to over 100% of our national income. We are about to hit that level again in the next 2 years. If we do not change course on spending policy, we will rapidly far eclipse the borrowing of World War II. Now, we are not going to hit this level of debt. A choice will have to be made, and it will either be made by the United States Congress or the people that lend us money. In the case of countries like Portugal and Greece, their governments said yes to everyone, and therefore all of the key decisions were not made by elected officials. They were made by the lenders who said, we're not going to lend you anymore. As Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of England said, the problem with many socialist governments is that they run out of other people's money.
We are headed for the most predictable crisis we've ever seen. And he's talking about what I just mentioned. There's no denying, there's no avoiding, the debt that's coming. I call it in the book the Red Menace, try to get somebody's attention, and to suggest that in its own way, the red ink of our debt is every bit as mortal a threat as the Soviet threat that we used to confront. Not
Yet what's been the response of the political leadership in Washington? Have they gotten a message? It's been basically just more of the same on both sides. Neither party has received or understood the message that I believe the voters of those 3 previous elections were trying to send to them. The party leaders on both sides of the aisle have continuously read those election results as broad mandates to ram through whatever they want to accomplish, their own agenda by any means. I think they should have read them as a cry for ratcheting down the divisive rhetoric and ratcheting up consensus government.
First of all, Don, I'd like to get a couple of questions out of the way, if I can. I'm sure they're on your mind. Where is Osama bin Laden?
That's vicious. He is having trouble communicating. He's having trouble traveling. I hope he's having trouble recruiting. I hope he's having trouble raising money. And I hope somebody in the world finds him.
We have plenty of people looking, don't we?
There's the base hit. It's moving around second and he's taking it third with his stand-up two-bagger. Ready, grab on. Oh, grab on the third.
And welcome to Dixon, Illinois, where we have 7 different sites of Reagan origin that will be holding centennial celebrations during 2011. Here we have the Reagan Memorial Room, which has a history with a mural showing different phases of his life and memorabilia from Tampico, where he was born, Dixon, where he grew up, Eureka, where he went to college.
Is your poll perhaps given more credibility because you are an objective third-party pollster?
Well, that's a good question, or a good series of questions embedded in there.
Sure. Today we had an emergency summit on synthetic drugs. We gathered approximately 200 members of law enforcement, educators, medical personnel, parents from around the state to talk about fake marijuana and convenience store cocaine. These are 2 substances that have become readily available convenience stores, gas stations, tobacco shops, and because people can purchase them, unfortunately, they are under the impression that these are safe alternatives to illegal drugs.
Because of the long recession that we've had, we have had to borrow money from the federal government, and we owe them $2.4 billion. This year, we have to start paying that back.
The Illinois Governor's Mansion, and indeed my staff, we have three main purposes here. One, obviously, is to make this a residence for the governor. The other purpose we have is to open the museum to visitors, and we have about 60,000 visitors a year.
Wow.
And our third function is to allow the people of the state of Illinois to use the mansion.
As a visitor comes in here, and for all those who haven't been or won't be able to come down at this time of year, let's give them a visual tour. One of the striking things is as you walk in on the lower level, you have the staircase. Tell us how that's decorated.
Well, actually, that was a tree. That's our largest tree, and that's in the center foyer as you come in, and it's right in front of the elliptical staircase. The interesting thing there is that was a tree that was picked by the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum and Library. And they decorated it in pink and greens, and you'll see a lot of presents hanging all over the trees. And because of that color scheme, Harry has taken these hydrangeas and he's kind of intertwined those all the way up that elliptical staircase, and they're painted in the pink and green to kind of go along with the color scheme of that tree. And it's absolutely remarkable. And if you look up, we've got a huge chandelier that's up on the 3rd floor. And that chandelier we actually lower to the ground when we clean the bulbs and the chandeliers and stuff like that, replace the bulbs. But Harry has lots of decorations hanging down from that, and it's...
A consistent rule of law is the key to stability in our society. But there are times when we have to ask, is this the time to carve out an exception? Is this the time to abandon the rule that we've had in the past? When should it be a bright line rule? I know as a trial judge, I love bright line rules. 3-part test, boom, 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 done, easy. But when do we need flexibility in the law? When should we allow the law to grow and develop? Maybe the hardest thing to do, I've learned in terms of writing these cases, is how to speak in the voice of a court of 7. How do you get 7 people to agree to anything? Especially 7 literally opinionated people.